Hello, wonderful listeners. This episode is an extension of episode 10, and in the first segment you can hear Michelle and I grappling with the concepts of praxis and automatic motor functions and complex processing and how all of that relates to executive functions. And we honestly weren't sure we were going to include all the parts from today's episode purely because we weren't convinced it was easy for anybody else to follow along, as Michelle and I work to embed the concept of executive functions into what we already know. But we set out to record real clinical conversations, and this is often what they're like. So keeping it authentic, you're getting our real conversation with all the twists and turns as we learn. And so here's to the process of engaging in deep learning, and hopefully you find some hidden gems along the way. Hi there, my name is Corey Dundon.
And I'm Michelle Maunder.
And you are listening to Spirited Conversations, engaging and elevating pediatric occupational therapists, a joint collaboration between SEED Pediatric Services and Developmental FX. Each week you'll hear from myself and Michelle as we nerd out with Tracy Stackhouse. Just a note before we start, Spirited Conversations is for informational purposes only. With that, let's jump in to today's episode. Hello, we're back. Hey Michelle, hey Tracy, how you guys going?
Corey, I'm awesome. I'm really glad to be investigating more of the exec function complex processing.
Me too. What about you, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm so glad to be back with you guys, and really excited to talk about the next, layer of understanding the really, executive functioning is complicated, but almost every child that we end up working with at the end of the day, we have to tap into it because it's such an instrumental set of skills for everyday life, from all of the planning and problem solving that we have to do to being able to stay regulated as we move through it and keep the coordination of all of the systems, that grand orchestration that happens. So executive functions end up being really involved in most of our goals at the end of the day, and they can be affected by almost all of the sensory motor disruptions that we might commonly see. So it's a really important topic for us to spend some time on.
Yeah, it was so helpful last time, and I'm really excited to get a bit further down the line this time, just around, I guess once the capacity has built a little more, what might we see, even just like in the everyday average human being, how do we see the executive functions play out? And then also I know, Tracy, you've talked about in my presence before the complex processing and how that can play into executive functions, or when that's not, I guess if it's not as robust a skill at being able to process the world in a more complex way, that can really have an impact on our ability to use our executive functions and potentially effortful control. I wanted to clarify one thing. Executive function, when I say executive function, is effortful control a separate element to that thing? Is it under the umbrella of executive function, or are they a tandem thing? Like, how is that? Yeah. How do you classify those two things?
Yeah, so that's a question that is still depends on who you read, I would say would be the answer. Right. So the way that I tend to sort of refer back to and think about this now is I think about them as sort of tandem functions, and that's really related to the neural networks that are involved in them, and also the resources that each are drawing from. So effortful control functions tend to be a bit more emotional in nature. They draw a lot from the social emotional circuitry in a really specific way because of that motivational system and how it kind of juices you up and connects you to, why am I doing this? What's my purpose? Executive functions draw from those effortful control functions to help organize you, to help you hold on to your goal set, to help you plan and organize and shift and respond to the changing conditions, and allow you to be really fluid in it. So at the end of the day, you know, when we self-regulate and we have self-control and we move into being the self that we want to be in the world, those self skills are supported by both executive functions and effortful control. So they're kind of kissing, well, they're tandem skills. They're collaborative skills that draw across a lot of different networks. Sometimes people will just use the term executive function to refer to all of it, but as the science is unfolding, there's really an important set of different networks that are involved in each component, each of those sets of skills. So I think it's important to disentangle them, mostly because in your clinical reasoning, it matters what you're focused on, what you're holding your intention and goal around. And so in the Spirit tool, we put in there the information that is really drawn from the research that tells us, here are the core things you need to be thinking about to really guide really efficacious intervention. So, yeah. So,
and
go ahead.
Doesn't the exec functioning, as you're saying that, Tracy, it's making me think that I can have effortful control. Gosh, I can't even say it. To focus on something that I might already be really interested in, and but I might. It's only when I add additional exec function resources that I might take it to the next level of mastery, that I might have some more development. Otherwise, I'm sustaining attention perhaps in a repetitive way, though, and not expanding it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so that's really because these complicated skills, they're vulnerable to kind of getting sticky, is the easiest way to describe that, right? So if you're really working on something and you start to be taxed by the complexity of what's required, either the thing that's hardest for you or the thing you're best at, in either direction, is going to kind of catch you. And so if you're super good at something, then you get stuck on the thing you're super good at and it's hard to shift off of it. Or if something's super hard for you, then you can just keep tripping over it and tripping over it and tripping over it. And so we can see that kind of repetitive error or kind of being stuck for either reason. But it's really because we don't quite have the resources to navigate the complexity that we're faced with. And so executive functions and effortful control are made up of all these sub-skills, and each of those sub-skills in and of themselves is more circumscribed. And in some ways, in some of the literature, they'll say that those are simpler. And combined all together, you end up with complexity. So complexity is really just when you have multiple skills that have to be deployed simultaneously and that you have to navigate that. So that's complexity. What's interesting also is that, life is complicated.
Yeah.
The task of, driving your car down the street is a really complicated task because you have to have the motor control and the sensory awareness to have all of the pieces in mind, but you have to remember all the rules of the road, and you have to remember the rules of the society, and then you have to think about the other people and safety, and you have to think about where you're going. And then you have to maybe think about I'm late, or I'm going to be early, or I have to park, or I forgot something, or all of the myriad of things that go on. So a skill that for each of us, once we've mastered it, like driving a car, maybe we have mastery over it and it feels fairly simple, but actually it's very complicated what you're doing and how you're managing it. And car accidents tend to happen when a person who's doing a fairly simple task for them, where it gets cluttered because of maybe they're multitasking too much, or a condition surprisingly changes and something unexpected happens, and then you have to respond to that in a particular way. So that's just an example of something that can feel straightforward is never that straightforward. And our daily life tasks as human beings always are this dance of complex and simple, kind of meandering and moving us through being effective at accomplishing the things that we want to accomplish. So, and doing that in the way where we feel like we could meet the challenge, that we felt okay about the challenge, or maybe even that we felt super proud about the challenge. Like even still, sometimes if I'm parking my car in a really tricky spot, I'll feel really proud of myself at the end of that moment.
Yes. Like if you do a really tricky reverse parallel or something.
Yeah, totally. So even something we have mastery over can still bring us about a sense of like, I did that.
Yeah. That's interesting. So that was a good example because you were talking about complex processing, and sometimes I'm like, oh, what does that actually mean? So I guess that was a good example of like driving a car for an adult of complex processing. I guess something like even just playing for a kiddo, playing a game of soccer is a fairly complicated thing, right? In terms of knowing the spatial bounds of, and sorry, we say soccer in Australia, so
we say soccer in America, but everybody else says football.
Yeah, so
Everybody else says football.
So we've adopted that one. We take bits from everywhere. But yeah, so I guess knowing where the boundaries are of the out, like where is out, where can I go? Am I onside? Am I offside? Where's my teammates versus my opponents? Where how far or close am I to the ball, or like where am I planning on going, and I've got the ball at my feet but I'm planning on taking it there, or so. And I guess it's similar in terms of motor, like in the car you have to be able to coordinate and sequence your legs and your arms, and similar with soccer in terms of I have to have motor skill around that, but I also have to have spatial processing, and so I'm just trying to think of an example where potentially if the load got too big, because it seems as though it gets from a point of being a complex process to being more automatic if you practice it enough. Is that kind of the thing?
And I guess there's also the quality of it, because I see lots of kids, my example, I guess, of complex processing is eating at the dinner table with the family, for example. Like eating is super complex as well. And it's that quality. You can have a kiddo who we might see on the soccer field that may vaguely know the direction they're going, but they can't balance on their foot and keep their eye on the ball and grade the force of the kick, for example, to get it at the right angle that they know. So I guess it just comes down to the quality of it, because I think a lot of people, adults included and me, can get away with some basics, but the quality
might
drops down. And then if the load gets even harder, it's a rainy day, I guess that's where you see that.
Yeah, or maybe the example on the soccer field is I can do that, orient my eyes to the ball, shift my weight, hold my balance, kick the ball to my friend or my team when I'm in practice and it's a straight line, like as in I'm just kicking it right directly opposite to me. And then now you've put me on a field with like multiple other players and I don't know, potentially distractions externally to the field, or like
people cheering,
who knows, and then suddenly now I really can't do that skill anymore.
Well, I can't hold it all together at once.
Yeah, like I have that skill in a less, and I guess I'm describing that situation in the training aspect as less complex. Like I can do it in a less complex environment. But does complexity also, the motor skill might also shift in complexity too, Tracy?
Yeah, and it's drawing from the automatic motor skills that we have, like we can stand upright against gravity and we can shift our weight and we can move through space. But now if you add complexity of, I have to move through space while kicking a ball, while moving around other people and toward a target. So something that is automatic can become really complex fairly quickly. And so we have lots of different, we have automatic processing, and then we have more volitional, planful processing. And those different kinds of motor processing, for instance, are simultaneously operating. And so when you are playing footy and you're trying to score the ball or score the goal, and somebody kind of comes in front of you, and you have to adjust your speed and your timing in order to do that, like online. If you don't have great automatic motor control, then you're going to have a much harder time finessing that. And so people who are super athletic, they're really good at coordinating the automatic and the planful, and being able to shift and switch between those two things in a nanosecond. Whereas people who are a little less finessed and less practiced at that, you can almost see that they're breaking that breaks down, where the automatic switch into planning and then back, you can almost see the kind of groping quality, or I can't quite, stop the automatic thing from happening from the thing that I want to do that's more careful.
Right.
Yeah.
Does it all happen do you have to get that automatic processing first? So I'm just thinking about that there's some kiddos that mightn't have the problem solving, which is part of exec functioning, to go fake it to the right, but then kick the ball to the left, which is a more exec functioning capacity. Do I have to have all the basics of the sensory motor system becoming or automated so I can do those things? And a bit like the exec functioning skills, do I have it? Am I able to shift attention, laterally think, come up with an idea to allow me to pretty quickly, I don't know, does exec function happen automatically as well, so that just happens as fluidly as the body shifts? Does exec functioning give me another idea and motor plan so I can do that in the moment as well?
Mm-hmm. So really, what you're drawing from, Michelle, is how executive functions in this way are really a part of our praxis network. They're really a part of our ability to become super skillful at using what's available to us, the affordances from our own body, with what's available out there to do, and sort of syncing those things up in a way that makes us really efficient and fluid. So that's really the kind of this broader umbrella of a praxis function, but it draws from the executive functioning network, and it actually draws from the effortful control network as well. So so when we think about these more motor-based examples, like driving a car, or eating at the table, or playing soccer, we're drawing from the praxis function as well. But so to think about it in terms of more the executive functioning networks that are involved in it, it's so that's the thing. Any of these human occupations that we perform in our daily lives, playing a game, getting dressed in the morning, driving, going to work, getting on the bus, all of the things that are our daily existence, they are complex skills that become automated on many levels, but we have the ability to then fine-tune them and get better and better at them. So we're always drawing from each of the resources that make it complex. So sometimes we draw from the cognitive network, or sometimes we're drawing from more the social functions. Maybe we're drawing more from language-based functions, or spatial functions, or basic motor or sensory functions. So anytime we're doing a complex skill, we have all of those resources that are available to enrich and inform the thing we're trying to do. And so executive functions are, in some ways, partly what's orchestrating that and keeping us on track. That, in fact, what I'm trying to do here is play footy. And what I'm trying to do is actually learn that sometimes I'm on offense and sometimes I'm on defense, and sometimes I'm going for the ball, but sometimes I'm helping my teammate to go for the ball. And that kind of shifting that happens really quickly within a game is really hard for our kids that come for therapeutic services, because they can't often navigate all of that shifting and all of the complexity simultaneously. And so you'll see them have 1 or 2 or 3 domains that are stronger and 1 or 2 or 5 that are weaker, and it breaks down, and it gets hard for them. And it isn't just a matter of practice. You can try to practice, but it's like, it's the complexity. You can't reinvent every complex situation. So it's a really,
and that's where that splinter skill training comes in. It's like, well, we can get you to be an amazing striker, versus let's work at the underlying function skills that aren't
it's
firing
like
up.
The example that I was giving, where that child has mastered that skill of kicking the ball to their teammate when it's in this situation. But as soon as you add all the other elements of complexity that are involved in a game, there starts to be pieces that break down. And what you were saying before, Tracy, around that automatic control that we have. So say I've now automated the capacity just to dribble a ball. So just to dribble it in front of me and keep it in front of me, and I know how to do that. But now you've added a defender, and I have to use my executive functions to stop and inhibit the automatic thing that I'm doing, to then plan to make a different choice given what's in front of me. So that's more like, that's where it's going into that praxis element, right, Tracy? Is like, this is what's in my environment. I have this automatic skill now, but I have to adapt that skill and use something else in my repertoire to adjust to the complexity that's in front of me. But like you said, you'll see that breakdown, and the kids sometimes that we work with will just keep dribbling the ball, and they'll dribble it straight into their defender, and the defender will just take it. You know, like you won't see the adjusting or the adapting in the moment. Or if you, like you said, you're catching the bus and suddenly you don't have your little tap card or whatever it is that people use to catch the bus in their different areas. And you then have to make a plan around, well, how am I going to get my ticket? What's in my environment? Where can I go to do that? Or do I have to plan differently to ask the bus driver to buy a ticket? Like, I guess there's that element of where often I'll see it in session is just the repeating of the same skill, but hasn't always adapted to the environment that has asked for something different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or they'll offer out the same thing. Yeah.
So I think for clinicians, one of the things you want to do is ask yourself that question. If you see somebody kind of being stuck and they're repeating, are they repeating because they're trying to master the automatic? And if that's true, we want them to master, we want them in a way to be stuck. We want them to master catching. If they're into it and they've not mastered that yet and they're stuck on it, that's not necessarily something that we want to shift. We want to help them stay flexible with it and not have to have it done in a super rigid, exact repeat way. But, you know, so the automatic function could be what they're actually working on mastery over. And you have to have mastery of automaticity often in order to really be able to finesse a little bit higher level problem solving and responsive to the conditions. But, you know, in the dynamic systems that we're dealing with here, they're simultaneously going on. But in the clinic, you want to be kind of asking yourself that, is this child kind of stuck here because the complexity is making it hard for them, and so what can I do to manage that? Or are they stuck because they're really working on the automaticity and the complexity, they're not even paying any attention to it because they're really dialed in at a different level? Yeah.
Oh, totally. Are they trying to get the automatic, or are we mastering the complexity? that really made me think just recently of a situation where I was like, a child came up with the idea for me to throw these little light kind of balls at them where they could stand across the room and just hit them back. Hit them. Basically, the game was, you have to throw the balls and try and get them past me, and I'm just going to hit them back. And I straight away was like, how else? Like, you know, I wanted to make the game more complex. But if I stop and think, like just stopping and thinking about it now, I'm like, oh, you aren't very good at throwing and catching, and you probably are just trying to master, this object is coming towards me, how do I time my hand and align it with the object that's coming towards me? And so,
and that was enough for them. They didn't need to make it
a
game or call it, I don't know.
And I tried to curiously wonder about what else could we do in this situation, and it just wasn't flying. It was like, no, I just do this.
Just do this. Just throw the ball.
And so of course I let go of my what are we doing here, and was like, okay, there's something in this that you're wanting to do, and potentially it'll get more complicated, or you'll move on when you're ready. And
I'll see what's really happening here.
Yeah. And it did, but it was just you talking about that then, Tracy, helped remind me that, wait a second, he was working on the automatic function of just knowing how to handle objects coming towards me. And I was not meeting him there. I was ready for complexity, a more complex game. And this kid totally struggles with executive functions. So really good reminder, actually, just for me as to like, oh, look, you don't always have to be at the complex level. And you might get there in certain situations, and in other situations you have to go back and refine the automatic. So I don't know if that comes up, like if you have thoughts about times where you've had to do that similar thing, Michelle, or just kiddos that help refine that. Or
my tendency is to want to wrap it into a game that transports into the playground so that they can be connected a bit more socially. Depending on the age, that kind of wouldn't fly in a school playground for very long, particularly if you didn't swap turns, or you didn't have the highest winner or personal best, so that is my urge to be like, oh, then we could, I don't know, I can't even think of what I'd say, but it's like, whoa, there's no game, Michelle, we're not in the playground, we don't have to help this kiddo have a play schema that becomes transportable. So that's my stop and think, this is just part of this. It's not a social piece right now. This is just a sensory motor automaticity.
Yeah, like learning a skill. So how would I'm thinking about for that particular situation, or even for other situations where they're trying to learn a skill, is it more in the curiosity and they start to open up? I'm just thinking about the shift between now I'm going automatic to more complexity. Is it more like we were talking about way back when we did our praxis episode around, if I offer out the curiosity of, oh, I wonder like how else we could play that game, and they go with me, is that then an indication that they've felt like there's a little more mastery around that automatic function?
Yeah, definitely.
Or how would I know it's starting to shift?
Yeah, so I think, as you start to have more command over the automatic pattern, like hitting the ball or catching or kicking or dribbling or whatever, then what happens is that your own drive, that motivational bias system, is going to be like, what else is there? What next? And that what next is a question that we have internal to us. When we have mastery, we want to use the mastery for a purpose. So automaticity serves purposeful action. It sort of subserves it. It's underlying it. And so when something is like, I got that, I got it, I've got it, now I want to use it. And so if I'm, that, and so it's sort of like, finding that. I think for our kids that can get stuck in loops and patterns, it's really noticing a couple of things. One is that when somebody's acquiring a skill, it doesn't look as fluid and easy. And we are really good at observing quality of movement, the grading and the timing and the positioning and the alignment and the ability to hold the eyes and head and neck and ears and posture in alignment to the thing that we're trying to do. So what you'll notice when kids are struggling with automaticity is that almost always you're going to see something that doesn't look quite refined. And that unrefined quality is sort of telling you either where some difficulties lie, or it's just revealing to you that they don't have it pulled together fully yet. So that's when you want to hold off on trying to add a lot of complexity, because, you know, if they're showing you that they're not really organized in their body and in space and in the skills that allow them, then that's telling you that. But I want to say a little caveat here, and that is that in the dynamic system that our system organizes around, sometimes the higher level thing actually is what syncs it up. So
Yes,
like
I was do that.
yeah, like I remember this one little boy that I was working with, and he really wanted to learn how to play baseball. That was like a thing for him. He really wanted to do it. So if I put and his dad had been working with him by putting the ball on a static little stand. We call that T-ball here.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to just hit it off of that stand. And I think he'd been working on it with him for a little while. But the thing is that it was holding him in this kind of more rigid posture. And he was trying so hard to hit that ball off of the thing that he was just, everything felt stuck and harder than it needed to be. So when I hung a ball from a string and it was more dynamic and moving in space, and then he could hit it, it freed him up. And so sometimes where he was like really holding the bat so tight and he couldn't relax his body, couldn't find his midline, all of these things were sort of bogged down because it was too static and it was too oversimplified, and he needed it to be more contextual. And so anyway, this is so interesting how you know what I love here is that we're talking about how automatic motor skills do play a really pivotal, critical role in executive and effortful control skills. So in the development of their development, just neurodevelopment, the whole system, the whole prefrontal system comes together because of sensory motor signals. And a lot of it is around eyes into midline, out, tracking, back to midline, out, tracking, and then how that synergy organizes our ability to take in the world to our midline and put our limbs out in space, take in the world, put our social beings out in space. So this kind of coming in and going out, coming in, going out, is a saccadic eye movement that's really clearly documented to be the foundational pattern that sets up the attentional networks. And so I think that's fascinating because when we work with kids, we see this coming in and going out, coming in, going out. It reminds me so much in the last episode, Corey, we were talking about a kiddo you were treating and how this kind of rhythmic movement and sharing space was such a cornerstone for helping him to start to get into that executive system. And it's really just a total mirror to how it unfolds. So, you know, we're having this conversation where we're talking about sensory functions, we're talking about motor functions, and then we're talking about executive functions, and we're talking about daily occupations. But so I hope people are following that line of thinking, because that's really, it's why we need a tool like the Spirit, so we can track our thoughts and so we can lock it in and we can figure out what to do. But this is the reality of what these neural networks do for us. So,
and it helps us choose which one to lean into. Again, I was thinking of the kiddo we spoke about last episode. We have taken sensory motor away at them for a little bit at the moment to firm up. and going with the motivational system,
Yes.
and firming up the exec functioning, attentional, working memory systems, and then we'll have to layer it back in though, because
Yeah.
when he is walking around freely,
He
that
won't hold it.
It doesn't hold it.
Or we'll
And
have to figure out how to create that so that
That's
he
right.
does, right?
I'm thinking that we're building the exact functions so that we've got some, this isn't the right word, but neural robustness to it, so that then we can lean into the sensory motor system with a little bit more foundation, I guess.
Yeah, like having the capacity there to build off of.
Yes.
I guess we haven't necessarily taken away a sensory motor, but I think what you mean is when I'm not working on building that as a skill, I'm not directly working on building sensory motor functions. I'm using what he's presenting in his current capacity to inform what I need to give him to support the sensory motor skills. So like having containment physically, being on the swing, giving that linear input, all of that helps anchor him. So I've got the sensory motor piece there, but I'm not challenging that.
Yeah.
I'm like trying to figure out how do I support that skill, and then use like you said, the motivational bias of wanting to be with and the rhythm to then build the stop my thought about the window, come back to Corey.
Intention.
And so I don't know, like
Yeah. I agree. You were working in midline and that approach and back, but look, we're not going into bilateral and.
But Tracy's
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing just then of coming in and that psychotic eye movement, because I'm nowhere in my session getting out pen lights or ocular things for him to track or any of that, but he's coming into his midline and orienting to me and getting eyes on me, and then his eyes are moving away, and then he's inhibiting that eye movement and coming back to me, which is like literally, isn't that the definition of a psychotic eye movement, Tracy?
It certainly is.
And as you're coming and going, he's converging and diverging,
Yes.
but staying on.
Yes. So that's really cool, because I didn't even think about that last discussion.
Yes, you did. Yes,
no,
you
but I mean, like, it's just, again, refining your ability to actually observe what is going on in this moment with this child that relates to the neurology of why I'm building this capacity.
That's exactly right. That's right. And it's the adaptive response. I mean, what we're talking about, ultimately is, and this is sort of my passion in the world, is to help clinicians find those threads of here's where this child is and here's the adaptive function that I really want to strengthen for them. And then how do I connect the dots between those things? And in the activities that we're doing in treatment, in the experiences that we're having and sharing in daily life, how are we going to really build that? And so I think that it isn't just through practicing like a splinter skill, like you guys mentioned before. It's about understanding that whole network and how do I bring it into the next level of capacity. And we were talking earlier about just complex skills. So what you're going to see is, as the skill starts to strengthen, then you can start to focus on the different components of complexity. And so much of what I think our work is about is figuring out, when am I going to layer in, attention versus social versus language. And that's why we have to have these kinds of discussions around each of the kids we treat, because it's not a straightforward formula, and it isn't something that you do the same with the 10 kids you see in a few days in the clinic. It's always individualized. Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering so for the example of this eye movement of moving my eyes, directing my eyes, I know that like early on, usually that's related to a social interaction, right? It's usually driven by, I want to find your face and I really want to
And the
hold.
carers,
Yeah, usually. So I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking about the next steps for all of these things, because for my kiddo, he's starting to do that. I'm just wondering how it would start to look as it moved, as the capacity increased. So he's got this ability to do this in this context, I guess, as that neural capacity develops and I have more I guess, robustness in the pathways. Would that be when then I start to think about that same activity, but then wondering about if I'm a little further away, what happens? Or, I don't know, it's just how we would start to tweak the activity to see if there was some holding of the capacity at a greater adaptive, like, can I adaptively respond at a greater challenge?
So that's scaffolding, like taking it to the next level.
Yeah, well, how would we take that kind of thing and move it forward and just as a wondering if that was where he's ready, if that's what he's ready for, because
And which bit do you scaffold? Like, I'm wondering about your affect. It's
totally.
Like, if I tone my affect down, and I don't join in singing the nursery rhyme, does his eyes, his oculomotor system stay on? Does his attention stay on when you turn affect down?
I'm laughing because I did this yesterday and he goes, "You're not singing."
There you go. So that's not.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's sing. Which is really cool because he told me, like, come on, like, you're not singing. I didn't lose him.
Maybe the next step is going further back.
Or moving further away. Or is it the swing itself? Do I offer slightly less postural stability? Or, like, can you still organize your whole system to still find me in space or not? Or... I'll
move him close to the window so the law of
the distractions are bigger. Yeah. I don't
know. Can we go wrong where we choose to challenge?
I don't think that you can really go wrong as long as you're observing the adaptation and you're following that and you're staying in the line of what is it that you're really trying to help him to build toward. What's interesting is that we're working on his eyes to you, to you and away from you, to you and away from you.
Yeah.
Because that's hard for him. And if a child has that capacity inherent to them, then they just have it and they use it and it's pretty robust and then they can build from it. So the kiddos that we end up seeing for therapy, some of these automatic capacities that really subserve higher level skills, like executive functions, we all have the potential to develop them, but we aren't sort of born with them. But we all are going to learn how to move with anti-gravity control unless we have a sensory or motor reason that's hard. So we're going to have this ability to move our eyes. But if we don't, then that's so foundational, and it does undermine then the next level of complexity. So really, in your clinical reasoning, what you're looking for are what are the foundations that they have in place, and then what are the stretch points. Sometimes I'll teach this through using this spiraling continuum that comes from Grady, Guilfoyle, and Moore. We've talked about it many times. But I really do try to think about what is in that landing pad, what is in their zone of proximal development, and then where is their referent point? Like, is his referent point you being 8 inches away and totally affectively fully engaged with him in order for him to have saccadic eye function that's social and serving his executive function. So the next stretch point for him would be if it's primarily ocular and postural motor, then that's your stretch point. If it's primarily attention, then that's your stretch point. If it's primarily planning in space, then that's your stretch point.
Right. So
it's really through clinical reasoning that you figure it out.
So I was just going to try to give an example of each of those in that. So if it's mostly postural ocular, if that's the thing that's not pulling together for him, then I would try to stretch him further in that skill given that task. So if, for an example, maybe the swing isn't the bolster swing because I wanted to stretch him slightly in his postural system, and I shift it to potentially a platform swing. I don't know, because it doesn't have the hip. I'm just giving an example that maybe I could try and see if I can still keep him connected, keep the adaptive function of the saccadic eye movement back to me rather than flitting off and then going. Whereas if it's spatial, like if for him spatial processing is, and I'm sure all of these things are, but it's just me then figuring out which one's the biggest piece. But if it's clearly a spatial challenge, then do I shift myself in spatial orientations as we play the game? And can you still then saccadically find me? And that could also relate posturally, right? Even just how do I rotate my posture then to find you if you're not directly in front of me? Or, or if it's social, if it's in that pathway, then how do I either playfully obstruct or whatever it is, and then can you still stay in it? So is that what you're meaning, Tracy?
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to put this on the head because I've got some kiddos that I work with and they love to sit in the exec function domain. They know presidents of United States and their height and their date of birth and death and the order with which. So in sessions, that's where they want to live and they're repeating that. I don't feel like it's for mastery, and are they living? They're not really going to the automatic or allowing me to come in from a social perspective or even a sensory motor perspective. I can't turn it into something else. I don't even know if I'm asking my question, but it's just like they're living in exec function trace. And it feels like, I guess, some of the kiddos go there, and maybe I do too, to regulate. Like I wonder if it's a coming back to, and then they talk about the presidents repetitively. Is that, I've assumed that's a regulation strategy because they, anyway. Have I got enough in there for you to help me understand why do people live in exec function?
Well, you just made me think of, which we can all talk to, but if if that repeatingness, because if I was thinking about it, I'd be like, oh, they're not shifting, which is one of the executive functions, right, Tracy? So they're kind of stuck and sticking to this one thing over and over and over again. And if I was just going to purely think about, then how do I shift them away from this? I could miss what Michelle may have picked up on, which is, why aren't they shifting? And what is it about this that's supporting them? And you've smartly gone, well, maybe it's regulating them in some capacity. But how does that particular thing in terms of sticking to the one thing help us connect executive functions to regulation?
And even keeping in the exec domain rather than the sensory motor or the social.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, take it away, Tracy. Take it away.
It's a big question. Poor Tracy.
We've got 7 minutes for you to unpack that.
Well, it's kind of a new age question and an age old question, kind of simultaneously. And honestly, depending on your discipline and your perspective, you might answer it really differently. What I love about how we holistically help to understand kids, though, is that we're not going to get too connected or like bought into any one perspective and really try to answer the question, the why question. So at the cornerstone of clinical reasoning is really the why. And if we can understand the why, then we'll really pretty logically know the what to do. So for one kiddo that has, mastery over a topic, sometimes it is more about, this is something that I come back to that gives me a sense of agency and mastery and competence and certainty. And from a place of certainty, there is a safeness that establishes my regulation, that I kind of know the landscape because we're talking about something I can talk about. And I don't need to worry too much about the things I don't know, because I'm going to just talk about the thing I know how to talk about. So for very many individuals, that getting stuck in a loop is a safety loop. And if we acknowledge that it's creating a safety loop and we address it more from a regulation standpoint, let me be with you here and understand that with you and be curious and interested, and then when you're feeling regulated and safe, probably the openness to shifting will reveal itself. But for another kiddo, it could be that they're using it in a different regulatory capacity to sort of just paint the landscape for themselves in a different way. For another child, it could be that when they're trying to deal with complexity, so this is the same thing, it's a regulation issue, but they're trying to deal with complexity, and so they're giving you what they know so that they're removing some level of complexity. And so lots of times, on some level, there are theories that suggest that complex processing is really something we all need to understand better. So we started this episode talking about complex processing, and very often it is related back to, I'm just processing what I can process because the rest of it is too complicated. The thing that's interesting is that sometimes individuals who get stuck in loops like that, once they get organized enough, they can tell you, I really didn't want to keep talking about the presidents. It was just the only thing I could pull up. It was the only thing I could go to. And so sometimes it isn't just talk to me about the thing I'm interested in. It's help me talk with you. Help me be with you. So on a regulation standpoint, that's what we're always going for, is you and me together in a we space, as Dr. Siegel would say. And in that space, we can co-create the world together. So we want to go for that if that's the regulation foundation. But some kids get stuck in a topic because that, sometimes I think about it like more like from a attention and language standpoint, and it's just that vat of information is so big, and the other one they're trying to draw from is a little smaller, and it feels like I just can't find my way over to that other content that I have. So very often it's more of a language processing issue, and we need to help smooth that. So again, it just comes down to all of these multi-component aspects to higher level skills, like attention shifting, and that we have to drill down to the why if we can get there.
You just made me think of the kids that you'll start, like if you've done an assessment with them and then you're asking for a specific assessment task to be done, and they will just give you what they know. They'll be like, oh no, I'm not going to fold the puppy. It's a colouring task. Like I've had kids do that where it's like, dude, that's like whatever you're asking me to do is way too hard. I'm just going to show you what I know, and and those kids, like, people are like, oh, they don't listen and they don't follow instructions. It's like, instead they just go, well, that's so hard for me, so I'm just going to show you what I can do, because like I can do this, but I can't do that. It's like, well, why? Why might that be happening?
And it's kind of adaptive. You're moving towards something that's familiar rather than a real moving away or, no, I'm not doing that. Like, that's even harder. And they're, that for some people, they're harder to understand. So that delightfully, just, I'm going to make the puppy pink instead of cutting the puppy out.
Yeah. And I guess we all want to show what we can do rather than be failing at something, right? Like, no one enjoys that experience. I've never really thought about the kids that maybe the language processing isn't quite there yet. So I can give you what I have in my language here, but I can't quite get over there. Like, I don't know how you would smooth that out, though. Is that more like we would need a speechy to come in and help us in that, Tracy?
Definitely. I think sometimes it really is trying to understand how language development supports all of this, and it's a whole other topic. And, the spirit doesn't have language on it in a particular way. I think it's not that we try to exclude it, it's just that it's really developed as an OT tool to help us. And now it just has so much application that at some point maybe we'll add language processing to the tool. But for now, what we need to do is really have a speech and language therapist, help us with it, because it's a whole level of complexity that we could, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Do you know what's popping up for me is this state dependency. And that there's different days when I can take different things on or different levels of complexity, and I can regulate myself and cheer myself on to be like, you can do this, Michelle. And, that I even front up and try to participate and draw on all my resources to do that. There's other times it was like, man, it's been a tough week. The kids just fought in the way home in the car, and, it's raining and we don't have any food in the house. I'm not talking about tax tonight, Dal, sorry.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. And I know I'm saying that playfully about myself, but it's like that for kiddos. It's like they come to us sometimes straight after, in between their schoolwork. It's the weather's been all over the shop here. There's some flooding happening at the moment. Like, there's lots going on for families. It's harvest time, so there might be some stress about all the rain impacting crops and, getting flooded out, and am I safe, not safe, and get to school and it's heavy raining, so there's no recess. Anyway, they come to AT and I give them the challenge that they successfully did last week. I was like, you're out of your mind, Michelle. So it's just that state dependent capacity.
That's right. And sometimes, repetition and perseveration are cornerstones to, just a window into understanding that a person's not in the most adaptive place. Whether that's because of something internal or external is a good question. And it could just be, life is hard right now, so I'm going to be a little bit stuck, or I'm going to be a little less able to make a lot of shifts or take on a new level of complexity. And I think being sensitive to that, and I think we've all had to learn how to be really more attuned to those external factors during this pandemic that we're all in, where the level of stress sometimes and just allostatic load of what's happening that we're all holding is a real factor. So we do see that as, an issue. I don't know. We could talk about this repetition through so many different lenses. It also brings up for me, in just a totally tangential way, I often work with individuals or with different groups around this condition called Fragile X syndrome. And one of the features of Fragile X syndrome is that people do get highly perseverative in their words and their thoughts and their actions. And so at some point, we'll do an episode on Fragile X syndrome and maybe look at it from a, that perspective as well, just in terms of when your neurophenotype sets you up to have more of that profile. And certainly, some of the children that we work with have perseveration without having Fragile X. But lessons from Fragile X can help us to understand this from a, and that's partly how I've kind of come to understand it, I think.
That'd be really useful. So looking at it from more of a biological function rather than a quality that they're using to try and adapt or cope and survive. So more a behavioural or a skill-based thing. Yeah,
that'd be awesome. Oh, what another fantastic discussion. Thanks, guys. I love our journeys that we go on. So
awesome.
We'll see everybody next time, whenever that is.
Next episode.
Awesome. Thanks, spirited conversations, you guys. Thanks so much.
This podcast is brought to you by SEED Pediatric Services and Developmental FX. For more information, please go to our show notes on our website, spiritedconversationspodcast.com, or catch us on our Seed and Developmental FX Facebook or Insta pages. So grateful to have you with us for this episode. Take care, and we'll see you next time.